What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. Today's video, we are going to continue to preview the divisions in the NFL in preparation for the 2024 fantasy football season. Today, we're going to do the NFC North, and I'm going to go through this like I did with the other videos in my previews that I've released over the past few weeks. I'm going to talk the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receiver, tight end, and then a little bit of defense and kicker for each of these four teams. If you're interested in more content like this, more fantasy football content, as well as other content, please check out my channel in the description below and like, comment, and subscribe. I make a lot of videos, a lot of different content, so check it out if you're interested. And today we're going to talk the NFC North. So if you're looking at now to a year ago, this time last year we were doing fantasy football drafts for 2023, the NFC North has probably had the most change in terms of how we view some of these players and these different teams throughout the last 365 days. So a lot of changes here. There's going to be a lot of question marks and things that we'll figure out during the season, but we're going to break it all down for each of these teams. I'm going to start with the Chicago Bears. Obviously, some of the biggest change in this team that we've seen over the past 12 months, bringing in Caleb Williams, bringing in some stud wide receivers, new running back, new offensive scheme, Shane Waldron coming over from Seattle. So what is this going to look like for Chicago? They have traditionally been a terrible fantasy football offense for years, and now they're finally getting some juice. I will caveat all of that with just saying that I'm a little concerned about this offensive line. This was a very poor offensive line last season, and how are they going to adjust? If they could step up and can perform a lot better, then we could see a big turnaround in this team. Otherwise, it could be pretty disappointing. So I bring that up initially because that's why I kind of curb my expectations a little bit with this team, is that there's a lot of hype around them right now. They're bringing in all these new guys, bringing in number 1 overall draft pick Caleb Williams, and people are kind of going crazy. But we've also fallen into this trap before with Justin Fields on this team, and we see how that has turned out over the past few seasons. So I'm not saying that Caleb Williams is the next Justin Fields or anything like that. I'm just saying curb the expectations a little bit. All that being said, Caleb Williams is generally going in the 8th round in sleeper, which is not a bad position to be in. He's kind of in that like late 8th, early 9th round. That's pretty good, and if he does hit, it could be some incredible boom value for you. But all that being said, sometimes rookies take a little while to adjust, and they're not able to just step in like CJ Stroud did last season and just take the league by storm. A lot of people are probably going to draft Caleb Williams a lot higher than that as the season goes along, and I wouldn't be opposed to it because you're getting him ultimately in that 7th to 8th round. That overall you're getting some good flex players before you're setting yourself up in a position where if he's your first quarterback off the board, you probably have a great team already. So I'm not opposed to drafting Caleb Williams. It's just I fear that the expectations of him are a little bit high. He's got some great weapons to work with, obviously, but there still needs to be a lot proven on this team that they can put together a successful offense. And because of that, I approach Caleb Williams with caution. I'm generally taking other quarterbacks, but I think it is a very good strategy if you do want to wait until that range where he's going to swoop him up. Other guys, we're going to talk the running backs now. So DeAndre Swift, coming over from the Eagles, had a great season last season with them at first, and then he kind of teetered off. This is now going to be his 3rd team over the past 2 seasons. So that concerns me a little bit, especially his ADP in the 5th round. I foresee that this could be a little bit of a timeshare situation in Chicago. Khalil Herbert is talented. Hasn't really put together a string of consistent success, dealt with injuries, but he has been productive, and so is Roschon Johnson, 3rd string. So Swift, I'm a little bit concerned about going in that 5th round. I would generally try to avoid him based on where he's going. I would prefer to take guys like Kenneth Walker at that range, Alvin Kamara, guys like that. They're going kind of around that same like 5th round range. I don't think Swift is bust concerning, but at the same time, I don't think that he will live up to that 5th round value. Herbert and Johnson are generally not getting drafted in 12-team PPR leagues, and I think those are decent stashes to get on waivers just to kind of see what happens. If anything happens where Swift gets injured, then either of those two are going to jump right into a must-add on waivers. So if you have an extra spot on your bench, I don't think it would hurt to add them. Wide receivers. So DJ Moore had some great success last season, did very well coming over from Carolina, got a big contract extension recently. So we expect him to take a big leap this season now that he's got Caleb Williams. And he's again in a position where he's going in that second round, third round turn. I'm not super high on taking him in that range. I would prefer him to go like a round lower, to be honest. And the reason I say that is because you're bringing in these guys like Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze. What is this target share split going to look like? Also, you've got rookie quarterback coming in, Caleb Williams as well. Like, what are his targets going to be? We suspect that DJ Moore is going to do the best of these guys, but Keenan Allen is also very consistent. I like the range that he generally is going in that 5th round. I think that's good value for him. But Rome Odunze really scares me because to me, he's clearly behind these other two guys. And he's going in that range of, that 6th round that I think could be dangerous in terms of how he's going to produce. And there's been a lot of talk about, like, there's these 3 receivers that are all going very high. And Fantasy Footballers actually did a very good breakdown of this. They're a good show that I like to watch for fantasy football. They talk about how, there's 3 different wide receivers on this team that are all going at an ADP that are very high. And generally in the past, they can't sustain, 3 wide receivers can't sustain being at that level that they're being drafted. Somebody has to drop off. And more than likely, and I agree with him on this, Rome Odunze is going to be the one to drop off. So with that being said, I think that he's somewhat of a mistake to take in that round, in that range of the 6th round. But I'm also a little bit concerned with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen as well. I generally prefer other guys that are going around that range of DJ Moore, like Mike Evans, Deebo Samuel, guys like that. Amari Cooper, I generally prefer over Moore just because of that question mark of how the target's going to break down. The good news, though, for these 3 is that there's really not too much behind them on the depth chart. None of these guys, Tyler Scott, Velus Jones, DeAndre Carter, really move the needle for me at all in terms of guys to significantly threat either of these 3 in the pecking order. And that's because Cole Kmet, the tight end, is going to be probably the 4th target on this team. Cole Kmet has always generally been hyped to go pretty high. And I generally find that for the most part, he's pretty disappointing. Right now, he's just checking out Sleeper right now. He's going in the 10th round. I think that I would prefer to get a tight end before you put yourself in the position where you're having to choose between Cole Kmet. I've generally found that I've never gone any lower than drafting Jake Ferguson in tight ends because the rest of the guys after that are kind of just question marks. So for me personally, I'm not very high on Cole Kmet this season. And Gerald Everett, he's getting older, but he has been very productive as an NFL tight end as well. And I think that that's going to pose a threat to some of Kmet's targets as well. So generally, I'm going to be avoiding him this season. This defense, I think, is going to be very underrated. They did very well to end this season. And I think that, adding Sweat really changed this team. And they've got some great defensive players. I think that Eberflus, now that they've got a more competent offense, he can really focus in on that defense, make them great. They're generally not getting drafted, so this is a great streaming defense to consider adding, and maybe they could be a league winner for you. That's why you take defenses at the end. Cairo Santos is the kicker. Nothing really to say there. All right, so it took a little while on that one. We're going to get to the Detroit Lions now. Detroit, quarterbacked by Jared Goff. So Jared Goff is he's a solid stream level quarterback, and when he's performing at his best, he performs in that top 10 quarterback range that you could have on your roster, but generally you don't feel like he's going to have that elite ceiling. He has games from time to time, but then he'll always follow it up with a disappointing game. You add in the fact that he really doesn't give you a ton in terms of rushing value. I generally find myself avoiding Jared Goff. But I don't think it's a bad strategy to wait until the range that he generally goes in the draft. He's going around the 10th round, which you look at some of the guys in that range, like Tua and Justin Herbert. I would rather have those guys if you're going to wait for getting a quarterback. But Jared Goff has really benefited from Ben Johnson's system, and I don't think it's a bad pick. I just don't feel like it's going to give you the ceiling that's going to lead you to fantasy football championship. So it's not somebody that I'm specifically targeting as my quarterback. Running back. So interesting debate here. So David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, both very productive running backs last season, but they're kind of in a timeshare with each other. Gibbs did very well to end the season, and a lot of people feel like he's going to get more opportunities, so he's going in that first, second round turn. And I think that's a little bit high for me for Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's got a lead upside. If anything happens to Dave Montgomery, he could really break out. But I've generally found myself in a position where I have Jahmyr Gibbs under the other running backs that are available at that range, under Bijan, under Breece Hall, under Jonathan Taylor, to be honest, because I think that there's just more of a known that with those other three guys that they're going to be the ones getting the ball for the majority of snaps. Jahmyr Gibbs is kind of, he has these stretches where he just is not involved in the game, and then you check your box score or whatever you're watching in fantasy football, and you see that he's only had 2 touches this game at halftime. What's going on? And then he breaks out. I just think that there's a lot of unknown with that type of thing with Jahmyr Gibbs. He does give you that elite upside, but just with David Montgomery being there, that's kind of a concern for me if I'm going to use a first-round draft pick on him. David Montgomery going in the 6th round, though, is excellent value. I think that he's still going to have a role in this team. They're going to obviously have some touchdown-dependent games. So because of that, I don't really rely on running backs that have that type of situation. But going in the 6th round for a guy like David Montgomery on a good offense like this is pretty good value, all said and done. But it'll be interesting to see how this breaks down throughout the season, because I think that if we see the same pattern as last year, I think that really changes the value of how we look at both of these players. Wide receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown. So looks like he's going to be one of the top wide receivers in fantasy football. I've generally not been taking Amon-Ra St. Brown up with those other guys. And the reason why is because I'm not as interested in this quarterback stack as I am with some of these other guys going in that range. So, for example, if you get Tyreek Hill, stacking him with Tua, you got a lot of upside there. You get A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts with his rush upside and his 1-yard sneaks. Great upside there. Joe Burrow with Cincinnati if you get Jamar Chase. Guys like that. Even Marvin Harrison, honestly, I was not somebody that I'm really taking super high either. But Kyler Murray with his running ability. So because of that, I found myself targeting stacks in these drafts to make sure I get the same quarterback wide receiver tandem and just double up the points. And Jared Goff is just not somebody that excites me as much like that. But I will say for Amon-Ra St. Brown, very consistent player. One of the best wide receivers in terms of just the overall volume that he's going to get. And you look at these other guys on the team, Jameson Williams, a lot of question marks with him. Like the range that he's going, though, if you want to take an upside play there, because he's taking some time to adjust his team. Last season dealt with a suspension. Now he's coming back, and all the signs are pointing that he's doing very well in training camp. So getting him in that 9th round range that he's going is pretty good value. The rest of these guys, not really interesting to me, though. Khalif Raymond, Donovan Peoples-Jones, those are more like kind of, they're going to get a long touchdown here and there, but not really going to be consistent. Traquan Smith, kind of the same thing. So if you're looking at among these wide receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be a focal point of this offense, and he is very good value. Wouldn't have a problem having him in the 1st round at all. I just generally don't find him being up there with the other elite guys that I'm looking at in that range. Sam Laporta is a tight end, and he's probably going to be the number 2 target on this team. Really like Sam Laporta, but again, a situation with is kind of consistent with a lot of these Lions is Sam Laporta's value as the number 1 tight end off the board in these drafts going in mid-2nd round is just too high for me. I know he had a great season last year. I know he's got a lot of upside, but I just don't see a significant difference between Sam Laporta and somebody like a Dalton Kincaid, a Trey McBride, a Mark Andrews. And I would rather wait a few more rounds and try to get one of them instead of spending up for Sam Laporta on the second round, which is a great time when you want to make sure you get your elite wide receiver 1 or running back 1. So because of that, I'm not super high on drafting Sam Laporta, but I do think he will be a great tight end this season. I definitely see him being top 5, but I don't foresee him being number 1. Defense, gonna be a good defense again. They got some sacks with Aiden Hutchinson and guys like that, but they've got to figure out a way to stop giving up the yards and the passing defense. Made some nice draft additions to their team to kind of address that in the draft, but yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens with this defense. They're not generally getting drafted, but it's something to keep an eye on. They're getting a new kicker this year, Jake Bates. It's somebody that'd be interesting for me because this is a high octane offense. I'm going to be honest, I don't know anything about Jake Bates, but just a team that plays in a dome like this that has a great offense usually has a very good fantasy kicker. All right, Green Bay. They've got Jordan Love at quarterback. Not to get too far off track, but I really do not agree with that contract extension. He was pretty rough to start last season, and then he got hot the last couple games of the year. Is it going to be more of that, or is it going to be more of what we saw at the beginning of the season with Green Bay? So with that, I'm a little concerned about this team. Like, what version of Jordan Love are you going to get? Are you going to get that early season version or this late season version? I think that, they're going to be a good enough offense, but I think just a lot of unknowns with that for me. You're also, this team in general has had their wide receivers dealt with injuries at different times last season. So now they're all healthy again. What is the pecking order going to be? So Jordan Love is a guy that I think he's decent value at the range that he's going, kind of like Caleb Williams in a way. But again, I find myself avoiding him because I just don't know if what we saw in those last few games of the season is driving up his value too high. Because before he really went on a tear in that second half of the season, he was a guy that was not rosterable. So that just seems to me like a big risk if you're going to take him in the middle of these rounds. But, talented player, I just generally am not very high on him personally. Bringing in Josh Jacobs. So interesting move here coming over from Las Vegas. What is this going to look like, him coming over now? He's kind of had some up and down fantasy seasons. He's obviously a very productive player. He's heading to a much better offense than what he's had in Las Vegas for the most part throughout his career. But it's just guys that change teams mid-career like this, it can be very risky. So I think that getting Josh Jacobs in that third, fourth round is pretty good value for him. I just find him to be a question mark that really could backfire. And I don't see a ton of upside necessarily that suggests that this could be a league-winning running back. So I'm generally avoiding him. Marshawn Lloyd is a good name to keep an eye on, rookie coming in, who is going to be his handcuff and obviously could be a very good one depending on what happens with Josh Jacobs. So, yeah, that's definitely a situation to keep an eye on. A.J. Dillon, just no. Wide receivers, as I already mentioned, I have a lot of concerns about which wide receivers are going to get the volume on this team. They've got 4 very talented receivers: Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, and Dontavian Wicks. Reed is the one going the highest. He's generally going in the 6th round in his ADP, 6th, 7th round range. Then next you have Christian Watson, kind of that 9th, 10th round. Romeo Doubs, 10th, 11th, and then Wicks is not getting drafted. I think that Reed is the one that I feel best about the opportunity for him to be the number 1 on this team. But again, a little high for his ADP. I would feel a little better if it was later on. I'm generally out on Christian Watson. I think that I just have not seen it with him. Romeo Dobbs, I think, is a good value there, but I just don't really see upside that's worth it for me at that range. Wicks is going to be interesting because he's not getting drafted, but again, what is his volume going to look like? Um, so just a lot of question marks with these receivers. I'm going to be paying attention to how this develops throughout the season. Right now, I'm leaning towards Reed as the one that you would target on this team, but I'm not super confident about him being a must roster player. Luke Musgrave, tight end that showed some promise last season and then had some injury issues and came in and out of the lineup. Going in a late range among tight ends, around that 12th to 13th round. It's a good upside play if you don't have a tight end. I'm not at that point in the draft. I'm not opposed to picking him up, but I wouldn't. If you are going to play that game, I would not hold on to Luke Musgrave with any attachments. If he does not perform in the beginning of the season, move on. But also, I think of the guys that you have available in that range, he's one of the better options to have. Like Ben Sinnott from Washington, not interested in him. Cade Otton, not really interested in him either. Guys like that. I think Musgrave, if you're going to wait to that very end to get a tight end, he's one of the ones that you want to target. Defense, talented players on this defense, but I want to see them put it together first before I consider having them on my fantasy team. Anders Carlson and Greg Joseph are going to be competing for the kicker, and I feel like Greg Joseph is going to win because Anders Carlson did not look very good to me last season. But I'm not going to draft either of them, so just in case you were wondering. Minnesota, last team here. A lot of question marks with this team. Some very talented players, but what is the quarterback situation going to look like? Sam Darnold is the starter. He's not getting drafted. I wouldn't recommend you to draft him. Maybe in a 2 QB league if you want to go stream route. But there's just a lot of unknowns about how long is he going to be the starter. When are they going to bring in J.J. McCarthy? It seems like Kevin O'Connell is very content with just easing J.J. McCarthy in, not rushing him in. I don't feel like they need to because they're a talented enough team that they may not necessarily need excellent quarterback play. They did pretty well last season considering that their quarterback situation was kind of a mess. So I think Darnold will have, as long as he's there, he has weapons that could put him in a good streaming situation that he's somebody that I think is going to be relevant this season. But not a draft pick type of guy because you just don't know how long is he going to be the quarterback for. And the same thing with J.J. McCarthy. I don't think that he's somebody that's worth drafting that, whenever he gets to play, he's going to all of a sudden step up and be great because I just don't really see a path to that happening for him. The running backs on this team, bring over Aaron Jones from Green Bay. A lot of people are not very interested in Aaron Jones. I don't think it's a bad pick to take at that range. Generally, that he's going around the time, maybe like that 6th, 7th, 8th round. That you're looking for your backup running backs, and Aaron Jones is talented enough that he could definitely become a starter. So that standpoint, I think he's in a good situation that you consider drafting him. I think if you look at him versus like Josh Jacobs, who we just talked about, or Derrick Henry, who we talked about earlier with the Ravens. I think that Aaron Jones is a solid guy to take a bet on because it doesn't take much to get him in terms of his draft cost. But again, older guy, new team, could go very wrong potentially. But also, you look at his backups. Ty Chandler looked okay at times, but nothing special. The other 2 guys on the depth chart here, Nwangu and Gaskin, have kind of been in and out of lineups on different teams. It's just, I think that this sets up well for Aaron Jones to get a lot of volume as a running back here, and he could be some great value there in the 8th round. Justin Jefferson, a lot of debate here. The fantasy footballers were actually they weren't taking him up in the they were passing on him for guys like Breece Hall and kind of in their mock drafts, they let him slide past 108. I personally don't agree with that because at the end of the day, this is one of the best wide receivers in all of football. And even when he had Nick Mullins throwing him the football last season, he still found ways to be extremely productive. I do understand the argument that with Darnold and J.J. McCarthy, it kind of caps his upside a little bit, but this is one of those transcendent receivers that is just he's just gonna find a way to be productive. They're gonna get him involved. Kevin O'Connell knows that this guy is the best player on his team. I think that Justin Jefferson is still a top 5 pick. He's my number 2 wide receiver on the board. Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, CD, and then Jamar Chase. Those are my top 4 wide receivers. So I personally am not scared of that with Justin Jefferson. May not be as great as how we viewed him in years past, but at the same time, this is still a top 5 fantasy football asset. Jordan Addison, I think, is another guy that is 7th round is pretty good value for him. I'm not very high on taking him because he's had a lot of off-field stuff too that kind of makes me wonder, like, is this guy like going to take the next leap forward? So I've generally been avoiding him, but I think I don't hate the idea of getting him in the 7th round to step up and be a number 2 wide receiver on this team. That's very got a very good offensive scheme. Other guys, the rest of these receivers like Jalen Naylor, Brandon Powell, they've been on the team for a little bit. Trent Sherfield is kind of coming from that same West Coast system. They could be involved from time to time, but I don't think they're really going to be fantasy relevant players. Hawkinson is getting drafted. Had some good moments throughout his career in Minnesota, but just coming off an ACL that late in the season last year, like I just don't think he's worth drafting unless you're going to draft him and then just stash him in an IR spot for the season. But I don't think it's really worth trying to spend up to get him by any means. Defense on this team, I don't think this is going to be a great fantasy defense. I think it will actually be a pretty decent football defense, but they've got a lot of question marks, and they need to show me some things before I consider putting them in my fantasy streaming category. Bringing in a new kicker this year, Will Reichert, not interested in him. But again, Dome, if this offense turns out to be very productive, this could be a good streaming option, depending how he does. That's all I have for the NFC North. Next, we're going to do the NFC South, and then we're going to close out these last 2 divisions, continue fantasy football content throughout the season. Hope you guys have a good night, and thanks for watching.